Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. It's episode 1 of season 2 of the Conservation Conversations. If you saw the preview a few hours earlier today, you will know who our very special guest is, as I announced it then. We haven't shared the news with anyone else, though. So for the eagle-eyed among you, well done. For those still to find out, I've got a few more seconds of suspense, and I'm going to enjoy this. I want to talk about my guest initially before I welcome them in and reveal who they are. We're going to be talking to the Folk Singer of the Year 2014, a singer who has one of the most glorious voices in British folk at the moment. She's been described as a shining star of the folk scene's firmament. That's by Fruits magazine. Another take on her vocals is that her vocals are magnificent, clear and strong with a direct emotional resonance. That's from Radio 2 magazine. But my guest is not just a singer, also a singer-songwriter. And it's quite common in the folk world, traditional folk world, that you might have musicians who are just reproducing the music that is part of the tradition. So we celebrate the way they sound. But we want to also celebrate the way that this person is creative and innovative. So they songwrite. And one of the compliments I've heard on the songwriting is that their songwriting is a triumph of folk art pop. So that Venn diagram, those three genres coming together, means that I think our guest is very closely aligned with what Stornoway does. Because we do tend to get called folk, although we've never really sought that label. We perhaps see ourselves as more soulful than folkful. But art pop is certainly something that we've from day one been interested in and associated with a bit more willingly and actively sought out that scene. So folk art pop is my guest tonight, and you'll find out who they are in just a second. But one or two other things. My guest has just been made, well, a couple of years ago now, but has been made the choir leader for the Buxton International Festival, which is a very esteemed festival in the UK here. And hello to our international viewers today. Thanks for tuning in. Finally, I want to say that my guest is also very environmentally minded and involved with conservation. They are actually a patron of the bog, or bog patron. So we'll look forward to discussing that shortly. And without further ado, let me welcome into the room here one of my favourite singers of all time. This is Bella Hardy. Welcome, Bella. Hello. How are you?
Quite overwhelmed. That's such the most lovely introduction. It really was very kind. Thank you so much.
Well deserved and well earned as well. I know you've been hard at work in this musical career of yours for a very long time now, and appearing at festivals like Sidmouth and others since the age of 13.
Yes, with a band called The Pack, first and foremost. I almost got into the whole thing accidentally because I went to a music summer camp run by Folkworks up in Durham, which they still do up there. They do amazing work. Met a load of people who I wanted to hang out with and have parties, and we were from all over the place. The only way we could get together was to meet at music festivals, and we couldn't afford tickets, so we formed bands and started playing at Sidmouth and Whitby. Whitby most, first and foremost, and then spread our wings out across the place. And here I am still, just trying to have parties with my mates.
That's such a clever way to see it, and quite a sustainable way, I think, because music can be that feast and famine career where it's a reliable income for a while, and then all you do get is the tickets and the parties with your mates, and it's not much else. So if that's something that you can take enough joy from, that is sort of sustains the passion for music making, then I envy you that ability. But it's brilliant to know that you get such reward from all the gigs, because you're very busy as a touring artist. I haven't seen you yet. I've only discovered your music in the past 18 months, I'd say. But
wow.
I'm really
You've got
excited
some catching
because
up to do. You really have.
Absolutely,
Years of catching up.
That's right. I could just catch up in February, March. I see you've got 10 dates you're on tour, and it culminates in the Manchester Folk Festival. So.
Yes, very much looking forward to that. And I do, well, to be honest, I actually really don't do much touring nowadays. I'm kind of going back into it after, the pandemic, and I had a baby pretty much straight after the pandemic, who's now 3.5. So I'm emerging back out of all of that into touring. I did my first kind of proper tour back last November, and then I did the spring this year, and then back out next. So it's kind of, I know that you've done lots of touring as well, so it's nothing compared to back in the day when it was just all the time with something. It's a really different experience now, but it's not necessarily an unhealthy experience to be balancing it out with other things, that's for sure.
And Manchester Folk Festival, are you particularly looking forward to anything we can expect there, surprises in the set, or
well, yes, because I am going to be playing, not exclusively, but a lot of new music. I'm working on a lot of new stuff just now. I'm on target, I think, to have a new record out next late spring, early summer. And certainly that tour and Manchester Festival will be the first experience that anybody has to pretty much all of those songs. And I'll be there with a trio, fingers crossed. And yeah, I can't wait. It's always exciting at this phase because I'm putting them all together into the record, and I'm just, and for me, it's the first record really in quite a long time. It's certainly the first, it's the first record of this level of creativity for me for quite a long time. And I honestly have no idea what it's going to turn into on stage, and that's really exciting. So your guess is as good as mine right now, to be honest.
Cool. That's perfect. It's very much in keeping with what we saw at Manchester Folk Festival this March. So Stornoway played about 6 months ago now, and we just had the best time. The whole reason for the Conservation Conversations series is that I was so excited to see who we were going to be with on the lineup at that festival that I made a wish list and went through them and thought, if I've got enough names here who I'm really quite a fan of, that I could speak to one of them every couple of days until the festival, and sort of work through everybody. And by the time we got to the festival, I had spoken to everybody and then met them in person. And we had such fun connecting in person, having connected through the screen, and finding out what an inspiring festival it is for all these artists, because they pour extra effort into their sets. Yeah. There's the tie-in with organisations like Sound Roots and the English Folk Expo, who really breathe a sustaining can you still hear me all right?
Oh, I can. I got you back. I lost you at Sound Roots for a minute there.
Okay, great. So what happened was we played on, I think, the Thursday of the festival, and then stuck around for a drink with several of the acts, and that was really fun to hang out. And then we actually had tour for the rest of the weekend. We had to gig on Friday, we had to gig on Saturday, and then again on Sunday. But the whole weekend that ensued, I was filled with a real warmth and encouragement by having met so many different trad players in Manchester, and talked to them and heard about what trad music means to them. So audience, please, if you haven't yet been to any of Bella's gigs or the Manchester Folk Festival, do go along in March. You're going to have a great time in March 2026.
It's one that's close to my heart as well, apart from the fact it's close to home. But I actually used to work at Band on the Wall, which is one of the music venues at Manchester Folk Festival and the English Folk Expo. I was running their learning programme for some time, and it's just a brilliant area it all happens in. And what you're just talking about is just the best thing about what we do, is that getting to connect with people and share with people. It's really what it's all about.
That's brilliant. I think I wanted to build on what you said there, and the idea of the festival and all this music that's happening there, and discuss the first of our questions for today. So on the theme of the conservation conversations, these conversations are all about looking not necessarily just backwards exclusively. We're looking forwards as to how to conserve for the future two very precious resources. We'll come on to nature as something that needs to be conserved and managed, and biodiversity as a particular part of that, and the relationship of biodiverse spaces to how people create their art. But the first one is kind of the easy question, because of what we've been talking about. It's the conservation of traditional music. So as someone very well versed in trad songs, and playing styles, and particularly vocal styles as well, and leading the choir that you've done. My first question, Bella, is conservation in that musical sense. So is there a creative work or live or recorded, that you've experienced, that you feel balances the urge to fan the flames of tradition with and stick to the original with the impulse to create something new and different?
One single work, my goodness. I'll let my brain just float around with that for a bit. Though actually, I think this conversation might touch on the reason my brain is not so quick today. I've been running part of my job nowadays that I'm not touring all the time is that I teach workshops a lot. I teach folk song and harmony workshops. I do them monthly here in Edale, so like 2-hour workshops. I do them in Sheffield, and then twice a year nowadays I do residencies in Edale. So I've just had 28 singers in Edale with me for 2 nights, from Friday until Sunday afternoon, and they just left me on Sunday, and we have an amazing time, and we sing from 7:45 a.m. in the woods until campfire at midnight. And so my brain is still in recovery a little bit, and catching up after just so much singing and harmony teaching. But so that's my excuse for slow words today. For me, I think one thing whenever we talk about conservation, and it's taken me a while to work out what the thing is that used to concern me about the idea of conservation, and it was never conservation. When it comes to song, it was preservation. I think it's always useful to think about the difference between preservation and conservation. I think I was I started gigging and singing and being around and singing in sessions and you know, in pubs at festivals when I was a teenager in the late 90s and early noughties. And I think back then, more so than now, there was a real purist faction. There was a definite do it this way thing, that I think is quite noticeable in my generation of trad singers, that I think we rebelled against quite solidly. And I used to get asked a lot in interviews when I was starting out and in the mid noughties, late noughties, how it felt to be the standard bearer or a standard bearer or flag bearer for the traditional music, and and how important it was. It was really a common conversation. How important is it to you to keep this music alive? And for me, the answer was, that's not my job at all. I'm not doing that. I am just getting the great privilege of experiencing this music and getting to thrive within it and enjoy it and show other people how amazingly enjoyable it can be. And I think there's quite a few of us in what I'd say is my generation that are maybe quite clearly the product of that and that conversation. I think one quite standout one is Jim Murray. He was, when he did his first EP and his first record using lots of synths and drums and patterns and electronics, that wasn't happening back then very much at all in trad folk. There was definitely a kind of branch off that was going slightly on the pop end. And you'd had bands like Equation, if anybody was around in the late 90s, and a few other bands doing a slightly pop folk, and of course you'd had folk rock, and you'd had the kind of electronic crossover for a long time, but the more experimental stuff, like I think he was pretty advanced with that. And I mean, now we're getting amazing stuff. Frankie Archer, woo! I saw her at Deershed last year. I went to Deershed for fun last July, and saw Frankie Archer play. And I really enjoy what she does in regards to, the modern and the trad instrument and the trad rhythm, and but not being afraid. It's that kind of just, as soon as we try and use conservation or think of it like preservation, as soon as we try and ring fence, I think, a way of behaving towards traditional music, then we're fighting a losing battle, because you have to be able to experiment, and you have to be able to be brave and do stuff, and we have to be a community that supports that and applauds that in order to just enjoy it.
Thank you, Bella. That's one of the best answers I've had to that question, actually.
It's probably quite waffling. It can be quite waffling, but that's okay.
So much there, and it's clear between the lines of what you said, just the real passion for the guarding the legacy of what this music has to offer, and not just for people who are making a living out of it at the moment and doing great things with it, but for hopefully many generations of people who are going to continue playing the older music, and then perhaps the slightly less old music as it becomes older and more treasured. I always find it so sort of blindingly obvious, but something I had to really learn a bit actively and be told this explicitly, that one of the reasons we have this as a genre in the first place, trad folk, is that it's the way we celebrate the strongest of the songs that humanity's created. They're the ones that have been around the longest, and they've survived the sort of the folk effect, I've heard it called, or a kind of a whisper effect, where the words change from singer to singer and generation to generation. And yet the ones that sort of stand the test of time are the ones that hang around, and we have to really work hard to protect. So it's just amazing to hear firsthand your thoughts on that.
I love that thing as well, that, you know, the reason the songs are brilliant is because they've literally spent hundreds of years being honed. Like, it's such survival of the fittest, and it's such evolution of just, you know, fabulousness. You know, it's been honed and honed and refined and refined and refined and refined through hands and hands and voices and generations. And it's, you know, none of us have to save it. It saves itself perfectly well. We just have to handle it and do it with respect and enjoy it.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. And there's a lot of resonance in what you say with things we've heard from other guests. I've run 23 of these sessions before in our season 1, but this is a great new kind of enriched way to start season 2. So thank you for being our guest here. We've had some comments on Instagram from the audience over there. The first one, I think, let me just read out a couple of sort of you know, happy thoughts here. These aren't questions, but just people excited that we're on together. So Henry Lawrence Chase said he missed these very much and hadn't seen one in such a long time, and is really glad they're back. Manchester Folk Festival is tuned in as well, and they're saying they can't wait to welcome you, and new music from you coming up as well, as we talked about. And then the third one here is a remark from Bethan. Bethan runs the most incredible centre in East Anglia, the East Anglia Folklore Centre, and if anyone has not yet heard of that or checked it out, please go along. They just realised some more funding to keep doing what they're doing. Definitely deserves a shout out and a visit. Does the East Anglia Folklore Centre. And Bethan just says quite simply, we are curators. After all the build-up, I got you phrase wrong. But you agree with that, Bella? We are curators.
Curators and creators, all combined.
Yeah, great succinct way of putting it there, curation as well as creation. And then the third one here, I will read this out, this whole question. So from user These Interminable Creatures, a nice poetic name, he says, how does trad folk know what it is that they are preserving? Are we sure that the older songs would have been played that way originally? Surely the rhythms and intonations are all lost in the wind. So I bet you have some thoughts on that, Bella.
Well, rhythm is preserved in a few different ways. I'm sure lots of it is lost in the wind. Lots of it is, you know, imagined village. If anybody, we won't go too far down that rabbit hole, but you know, we're humans and we do fill in gaps with all sorts. But I think rhythm is often preserved in written speech as well as everything else. So as soon as we have something written down, we have word rhythm written down, and you know, tune rhythm. There's a few remaining in England. There's lots in Scotland. There's lots in the northeast. Lots of the tunes have words that go with them. I'm thinking of things like the peacock followed the hen is a good one from the northeast. The slipjig. Overly tower and overly tower again. So as soon as you're saying the words overly tower and overly tower again, you have the slipjig rhythm. So while we don't have lots of historic recordings, we do have the written word and the printed word back to the 1500s, and the Stationers Company's collections of endless numbers of ballads and bits of written folk. So we have quite a long history actually of ways to remember rhythm, ways to remember tune. I mean, there's dottings and bits and bobs, but that's the thing I think we come back to with the idea of a pure way of doing and a source way of doing. And there was definitely a movement in the 90s and before, and there still is sometimes, of this like, oh, that's not the way it is, it's meant to be this way. It's like, well, it was meant to be that way according to one source recording done by one person to a man outside his kitchen door who wasn't expecting you to come round, and you've just asked him to sing something off the top of his head. Do you really think that that's the only way that was ever sung, and he wasn't just making it up? And it's kind of wonderful. You listen to source recordings from the Voice of the People and other things that Topic Records has put out, and there's a verse that's only 3 lines, and there's a verse that's 5 lines, and there's a verse that's in a completely different tune, and there's floating verses all over the blooming place. So I think to a certain extent we have to just remember that everything is human. Everything goes through the bias of humans. Everything is at the whim of what the humans chose to collect. And if you want to get into the true, history of the curation of folk, then you have to mourn the huge loss of great numbers of songs because collectors were biased in what they were choosing and what they were picking, and what was being hushed down because it was too bawdy or didn't hit the point they were wanting to make, in whatever their religious biases were or all the rest of it. So the idea of a true lineage of any music or any thought is, I think, problematic in the first place, and complicated. Now we may start a thesis. So much to be discussed.
I think that's a really fantastically rich response. Rich is that word I keep using because I've never really had someone of your depth of knowledge here. Sounds like just flattery here, but you clearly have a really nuanced opinion on these things. Have you considered, writing or looking academically at any of this and publishing these thoughts?
I think other people have done it already. I could probably, I consider these things, but they, up until this point of my life, have never become the priority for me. I love creating and I love making, and I love sharing more than anything else. And the great joy of the sideline, actually it's probably the main line at the moment. Sometimes creation is the main line and sometimes the sharing and teaching is the main line, but just being able to sing with other people and to introduce these songs to other people and to introduce the harmonies and sharing the wellness that the singing gives is, to me, so important. And I think maybe even when I'm talking in a way that can be slightly academic, that's the kind of important point I'm always coming back to is that it's the people are important. The people are the important thing, and the wellness of the songs and the connectivity and the sharing and the benefit for mental health of all music. But I think there is an especially rich benefit to well-being and mental health for people in folk music. And being able to be part of that for people is actually just the most important thing for me.
You mentioned wellness there, and that's almost the third piece of what makes Stornoway Stornoway. Our songs going back to the earliest days have a lot to do with mental health and reconnecting people to their wellness and each other by sending them outside, away from their screens. Unfortunately, the best way we have at the moment to communicate with people is through the screen, get the message out. But the message we're trying to deliver to them is screens ain't too good for you. Get outside and go and connect socially and with nature to address any lack of wellness you may be feeling. We have many songs about this, from the first album to the most recent. It's through the wellness. It's through the lens of nature and conservation that the band and I like to look at wellness. So I don't actually have a question that addresses it directly, addresses mental health or conditions around mental health, but it takes us on to our nature question. So the big second question for the day is another conservation themed question, but this is conservation in the environmental sense. And I'll challenge you to think of any creative space that, and I mean a physical space, a location that you feel invites nature to be part of the experience of humans creating or collectively enjoying art of any kind. It doesn't have to be music, but a venue might be an easy answer. But just a location that really lets nature into your creative process.
I mean, I think most people who know me will know the very easy answer for me for that, because I am so lucky to live in the Peak District, and specifically in the village of Edale in the Peak District. It's just behind those curtains there. And my family moved to Edale when I was 1. My dad ran the youth hostel, an activity centre. He took that over when I was little. And I did get out, as we always joke, and I got back. And for me, anybody who's traced a line through my music, it crops up again and again, especially when I wasn't here. The references to the mountain and the valley, and I actually have a tattoo of one of the trees in Edale on my back, which I got when I left when I was 18. And there's a lyric in the opening track for With the Dawn, which came out in 2015, which is, "There's nothing keeping me on track except the tree upon my back, except the skyline in my heart." And there's always been a very strong tie for me to the location here, as well as people. There's a very strong community, but there's something in the very hills and the nature of the place which has always anchored me. And so that's my easy response, to be honest. I have tunes named after half the places here. I have, one called Broadley Bank, which featured on that, and the Croydon Jig actually were both on an album, one of my first couple of albums. And then I have a whole album about the Peak District called The Dark Peak and the White, which is all songs from the area, largely from a book called The Ballads and Songs of Derbyshire from the 1800s, some with new tunes, but there's, the Rhapsody on the Peak of Derbyshire and the Elegy, which is about Derbyshire. And so I'm inspired by a lot of places, and but there's something in this one. I can't pretend that that's not the case. There are certain spots here as well, but there's nothing like Kinder Plateau and the gnarly ground that you get up there to just inspire this feeling of a rising creativity, and I love getting to share that with people now. That's the thing. I've just had this, retreat. I've had 28 singers with me in Edale, and we sing in the woods, and we have a campfire, and you can see the hills around us, and you can hear the sounds that I'm very used to. And I have a very, I suppose I have a very attached sense of change, and I'm getting more and more, as I age, I get more and more kind of infirmed within the kind of feeling of change, and the feeling of season, and the feeling of, moon seasons, and just being able to slow down and be still and observe and benefit from that slowing and that flowing with the change rather than ploughing through, which I did for a lot of my life.
A couple of audio issues on my end. Everything sounds. I wanted to ask you specifically, as you mentioned the mountains and different places that have inspired your songs. One of the oldest songs that you've interpreted is Hares on the Mountain. And do you get the sense that there's a specific place that inspired that song longer?
I don't know. I actually, for me, Hares on the Mountain, it's a song I've known. It's, it's such a catchy song. You hear it a few times and it's stuck. And that is one of the blessings and the curse of the way my brain works, is that I'm quite quick for lyrics. And so that's been with me a long time. But it really only started coming out my mouth all the time during the first lockdown, because I was lucky enough to be in Edale, and I was lucky enough to be able to walk up to the top of Kinder on my get out of the house walk. And I've never seen so many hares. because there was nobody about, and actually nature thrived so much during that time. I saw ring ouzels. I've never seen ring ouzels before. I saw a whole pile of ring ouzels, and curlews went absolutely mad that year, and I saw hares. So it was really that summer that I started just walking around singing that song. It was just with me all the time. Um, and actually it was the death of a wonderful man in Edale called Gordon Miller, Gordon the Warden, who had been around all my life. He was a Peak Park or a National Trust warden. I ought to get that right. He was National Trust warden since the 50s. And he spoke of the hills and the mountains with such eloquence and beauty in a way that it's hard to kind of express how well he could just very simply and with absolutely no froth or poetry just be able to nail the feeling of being on top of Kinder sat against a gritstone rock. And when he passed away, that song really was with me much more. And I don't know if it came from a specific place, but I think that's the joy of these songs, is they creep up and they creep into us, and just when we need them, and are timeless. You know, we are not saving these songs. They are perfectly capable of saving themselves.
Wonderful, thank you. I love the mention of the National Trust there, and because there's so many of these similar organisations whose role it is to treasure the legacy of something other than music, but equally precious to us. In their case, physical spaces, and many of them biodiverse and well maintained. I think, yeah, that's a really brilliant answer. Again, I just keep being almost led in all sorts of different directions. I want to ask you everything, but we're almost out of time, actually. And I just really thank you for this highly enjoyable half an hour.
That's all right. We shall save it for the extended interview
we've had
season.
Other comments from folks just saying, fantastic answer. That's from Proper Walkers. They're up in the northeast, and they lead long hikes through some of the places you've been mentioning, I believe. My school went to a residential in Edale in year 5, says Henry, and clearly enjoyed it. Nothing but love for you guys. Thanks, Alan. And maybe we can end on this one, Bella. Just another question from Henry to you, which is, who is your favourite folk artist?
Ooh, that's mean. That's mean. I used to write favourites as a fool's game, but we all have some favourites, that's for sure. Who is my favourite folk artist? You know, I still love the harmony singers. I love anybody who's going to thwack me with some gorgeous harmonies. And Voice Squad, Irish, 3 men. If you haven't heard Voice Squad, go do that. Who's my favourite folk artist? I'm a big fan of Nick Hart. He's a gorgeous singer. Sorry to embarrass you, Nick. Who else do I listen to at the moment? Oh, there's too many, and I'm friends with them all. I can't be favouriteist. It's a real problem. Oh, I saw Rowan and Anna Rheingans, and shout out to them because they're local girls as well. They're from Grindleford, just over there. To be honest, I could shout out to all of the locals because I'm so lucky where I'm from. When I was a teenager, there was a ceilidh band at our secondary school, and it's amazing how many musicians and people kind of came through that and came through the Folkworks thing that followed it as well. But Rowan and Anna Rheingans from Grindleford, they do incredible things, those sisters, and in all of the things that they play with as well. But I love getting to see the 2 of them perform as sisters. That was one of the highlights of my summer. Yeah, is that enough? Can I stop?
I want to back you up on the mention of Nick Hart, one of my favourites. And the crazy thing with Nick's voice is, I encountered the voice first without knowing when this voice had been recorded. The track came on without any context, and I assumed that it was about 60 years old, recorded in a kind of really plush folk revival time, maybe in a sort of Abbey Road environment with those sort of vintage mics and things. It's just the real crispness of the high fidelity production that he has. It sounds like everything's on tape and just in the best, most expensive microphones. I don't know if
But
that's what he
he
uses.
sounds
But then
like that on a stage as well.
The reason
It's just the
I
same.
celebrated the production style was because it exposed this most incredible raspy is just not the right word, but there's a rasping, breathy beauty in his voice, and there's a real like clarity of the note and the tuning. And I could go on and on about Nick Hart's voice. If anyone watching has not yet heard Nick Hart, you've missed him this year because he was playing the same Manchester Folk Festival edition as us, which was 6 months ago. But he's got gigs coming up and loads of records. You should go find the one called 10 Songs by Nick Hart, or Nick Hart Sings 10 Folk Songs, I think.
10 English folk songs, let's be
yeah.
specific.
Yeah.
The other person to always look up, we're going to Wales for Fern Hill and Julie Murphy. I could listen to Julie Murphy sing anything all day long. Go look up the vocals of Julie Murphy or Fern Hill.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've had another excellent answer there. Thank you so much, Bella. And Henry, I hope that satisfies your curiosity, because that's not just one name, but many more that you can follow up on. Oh yeah, and on that note, my guest next week is one that I won't keep secret. I'll reveal who they are now. I'm very excited to have Sam Lee joining me on Tuesday next week. Sam is another one of these really iconic voices, and I'll be speaking to Sam because he's got a gig coming up, not as part of the festival, but it's actually next month. So we don't have to wait till spring for to see all the acts I'm talking to. Tune in next week for Sam Lee. And Bella, maybe you'll tune in the audience. It'd be great to see you there.
I shall be flying questions at him.
Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation we've had. I'm really thrilled that we are recording these as well. They'll be available to watch again for a few days, and then at some point they'll be moved into the Stornoway Fan Club vault, so folks can join that and watch these to their heart's content. Thank you so much, Bella, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you very much for giving us your time.
Thank you.